Doctor Who vs. Scratchman, Part 10. Elena suddenly felt the ground beneath her feet give way. The small castle that she and that hideous abomination were hiding in began to fade into nothing but darkness. In a last-ditch attempt, the mass of tormented souls that had been pursuing Elena tried to reach out and absorb her, but she jumped into the black abyss that was appearing ahead. Both she and the monster then fell through an endless darkness as the last of the castle finally vanished into smoke. For how long they fell, they weren't sure. Time didn't seem to exist in the abyss they found themselves in. In the very distance, however, Elena could see what looked like a tiny shadow. In reality, it was the frame of the painting she had been pulled through. She dragged herself toward it as much as she could, and though it seemed to get further and further away at first, just as all seemed lost, she suddenly found herself right in front of the window frame and crawled through it. As the mutant looked back, she saw the abomination that had chased her falling through the endless darkness, not even attempting to flee. In the darkness, it was finally free from Scratchman's control, and unlike Elena, the monster had no desire to escape back into the hell it came from. In this darkness, where the last remnants of a universe existed before fading, the strength of a life form's will was the only thing that mattered, and there was no space or matter. When Elena tried to use force to escape through the portal, it didn't work. But ironically, as soon as the portal began to fade, her terror made her will strong enough to be brought towards it. The alien knew this, but didn't care. In this void, the pain and memories of what they had lost didn't seem to bother the creature as it sank peacefully into the darkness. Fortunately, however, the creature wouldn't have to endure an eternity in this darkness, as prolonged exposure to the nothingness would eventually cause it to vanish into nothing too. Once Elena had made her way through the portal and back into Scratchman's castle, she started to think the monster had been right not to bother. All around her were hideous monstrosities who had crawled out of the paintings, both Scratchman's victims who had been twisted beyond all recognition and their tormentors who had followed them, all fighting and tearing at each other. The hall itself had also vanished and was now replaced by a cavern made from mangled flesh and bone. In the very distance, Elena could see what looked like several creatures working together and torturing a demon. It was in fact the demon that Scratchman had left in control of the paintings, who had earlier captured Elena. The creature pitifully begged its former victims to show clemency, which of course fell on deaf ears. Just as before, Elena wisely stayed out of the fighting and tried to make her way through the bloodbath to find the Doctor and Yarox. The Doctor's attack on Scratchman had only distracted him for a few minutes, but in that time, his entire world, or rather what was left of it, had been thrown out of order. Several pocket dimensions he had created, such as the paintings, had collapsed. The structure of his castle had been stripped to its bare bones, even without the fire. Outside his castle, the entire landscape had been ravaged. The land split open, and the lake of torment flooded the battlefield. The armies fighting in front of Scratchman's castle were swept away in a tidal wave, with only a few harpies and some of Scratchman's demons managing to escape into the castle, or at least cling on to the side of it. The waves very nearly toppled the castle itself and burst through some of its foundations, flooding the inside. Elena was barely able to escape by climbing up a nearby wall, which she was able to do more easily as many of the bones that made the castle were now sticking out of the walls. She was one of the few survivors from the paintings to crawl or fly to safety up the castle's walls. As Elena looked down, she saw all of the demons and their former victims suffering together in the burning green waters as they were washed away. Scratchman himself, meanwhile, was able to save the Doctor and Yarox from being swept away by the flood as it broke through the walls into his room, by lifting them through the air with his telekinetic powers.
"I don't know why you bothered. I'm still not going to help you," the Doctor said defiantly.
"Oh, I know, Time Lord. I'll have to find a way to break your machine instead. You are too dangerous to be allowed to live, but... well, I think a little dip in my lake is too good for you. Look at the trouble you've caused. I have even less time to make it out of this world now. No, I think I have just the right punishment in mind for you," Scratchman said as he slowly morphed back into his humanoid form. Scratchman carried the two time travelers down a long hall that was flooded with the Lake of the Damned. Along the way, several of Scratchman's most loyal minions called out to him for help, but he didn't listen. When they finally reached the end of the hall, it was a large silver room with a huge hole in the center and a monitor on the wall. The water, it seemed, was incapable of flowing into this area. It just stopped at the entrance. Scratchman lowered himself to just beside the hole while he held the doctor and his companion above it. "Remember, Time Lord, when I told you I kept previous realities I conquered as small pockets of existence? They're kept alive through a special supply of energy. Even your little trick couldn't hurt them. Here they are. Don't worry, though, I won't just throw you in. Where's the fun in that? Since I might not be getting out of this, I might as well enjoy myself, don't you think?" In truth, it wasn't just cruelty on Scratchman's part. After the doctor's trick, he needed to recharge somewhat, and the doctor and Yerox's suffering from this little game could potentially at least help give him a small boost to take on the TARDIS. Scratchman dropped the doctor and Yerox into the hole. Below was a long, silver, yet dark corridor.
"This is a little anticlimactic, Harry," the doctor said.
A massive fireball suddenly came hurling down one end of the corridor, forcing the doctor and Yerox to flee. As they ran further down, however, the roof suddenly disappeared. Up above was nothing but blackness, but the doctor and Yerox could hear screams and roars all around them. Even the fireball itself seemed to be screaming. The doctor and Yerox reached the end of the corridor where there was a portal that looked like a hole in the ground and led to one of Scratchman's pocket dimensions. As the time travelers looked into the portal, they saw a dimension, or the remains of one, that appeared to be nothing but a wasteland, with a huge tree in the middle. Several damned souls were trying to climb up the tree, which was covered in jagged, spiked branches. The souls were cutting themselves on the branches the higher they climbed and were screaming, yet suddenly had no choice but to keep climbing. You've reached the remains of one of my favorite hell dimensions. You get the gist of the game now. If you can't get out of my little maze, I'll let you go. Well, I'll kill you quickly at least. Well, quicker than I would have. If not, suffer in one of my many layers of hell." The doctor helped Yerox to climb over the wall, after which Yerox then helped to pull the doctor over just before the fireball would have struck the Time Lord. The fireball then vanished down the hole into the hell universe below. On the other side of the wall was another fireball that forced the two time travelers to flee up another corridor.
"It's like we're trapped in some gigantic, nightmarish pinball machine," the doctor said.
As the Time Lord and his companion turned round the nearest corner, they saw a large, possibly 20-foot-long iron dog, with blood and flesh dripping from its fangs. The creature charged at the two time travelers, who both jumped to either side of the wall, narrowly dodging the abomination. They then ran ahead of it together to the end of the corridor, which ended in 3 more corridors. Picking one at random, the doctor and Yerox ran down the center corridor, only for yet another fireball to come rolling down the other end.
"I really hate those things,"
the doctor said as he and Yerox ran back down the way. When they reached the end of the center corridor again, the iron dog was waiting for them, roaring and hissing as the doctor tried to help Yerox climb over the wall. Suddenly from above, several griffin-like creatures emerged from the darkness, with one ensnaring the doctor in its talons. Yerox tried to pull the doctor back down, but the dog pounced on him. The griffin then carried the doctor high above the maze, which he could see was an absolutely enormous web of corridors filled with fireballs, creatures, and other dangers. The griffin dragged the doctor to another pit at the end of one corridor and dropped him down it. The doctor, however, barely managed to hold on to the edges of the hole as he fell. Below, the Time Lord saw this pocket dimension, or layer of hell, was a lake of fire, over which there was a huge suspension bridge between 2 large cliffs. There were also several people being forced to walk from one end of the bridge to the other. Each time they crossed the bridge, however, hideous griffin-like creatures, similar to the monster that had brought the doctor to this pit in the first place, would attack them and force most of them into the fire below. The doctor tried to crawl back up, but each time he did, the griffin would fly back down and claw at him. Yerox, meanwhile, was able to wriggle free from the iron dog when it bit into his back as the creature, which stood over 7 feet tall, only grabbed a flap of his clothes, which, when it pulled, it ripped, allowing Yerox to then slide under the monster undetected. Yerox then ran down the right of the 3 corridors. Once he reached the end of it, however, he came across two large wooden doors without any handles. He tried to push them open, but the doors then pulled open at either side, revealing that they were actually a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. The mouth, which dribbled green, acidic saliva, started to snap shut furiously and moved down the corridor after Yerox. Unfortunately, at the other end, the dog was already waiting for him. With nothing left to lose and in a rush of adrenaline, Yerox jumped at the dog as it bent down to bite him. Grabbing onto its head, he then hurled himself over the beast's head and onto its back. While it was distracted trying to shake him off, the dog failed to notice the wooden mouth that charged at him. Within a few seconds, the two doors lined with razor-sharp teeth had closed around the dog's head, ripped it off, and crushed it into powder. The two doors then crushed and consumed the rest of the animal, while Yerox made his way down the left corridor. Elena, meanwhile, had climbed her way to Scratchman's control room. Crawling along the walls of the rapidly crumbling castle, she could see that the water stopped at the silver corridor on the wall and crawled along towards it. Elena could see Scratchman watching the Doctor and Yerox struggling in his twisted game on the massive computer screen. Scratchman was hysterical with laughter at the two time travelers' plight. Elena knew it was pointless to try and attack Scratchman. There was no way she could hurt him, and she'd probably vaporize herself if she touched him. Even if she tried to help the Doctor then, Scratchman would still see her on his monitor. Still, she couldn't just leave him dangling over one of the Scratchman's worst layers of hell. Elena jumped down the hole into the maze. There she ran down the corridor until the roof disappeared. A fireball soon headed in her direction, and so she jumped up to the top of the wall beside her. It took her a few goes, and it was only on her last attempt that Elena managed to grab the top of the wall with her fingertips and pull herself up before the fireball could consume her. Balancing herself on the top of the thin wall, Elena looked all over the maze, which did resemble a gigantic pinball machine with huge flaming pinballs running down almost every corridor. In the distance, she could see the griffin hovering over the Doctor. Wasting no time, Elena jumped from the top of one wall to another until she reached where the Doctor was. Catching the griffin off guard with a powerful kick to the head, she sent it flying over the top of the nearest wall and into a fireball on the other side, before helping the Doctor up.
Elena, I honestly thought I'd never see you again. Then again, I didn't think I'd ever see anything again dangling over that abyss. Thank you, the Doctor said as he got his breath back. You're welcome. Where's Yerox? I don't know. We got separated in this overgrown pinball machine. Come on, we need to find him. The griffin suddenly re-emerged from behind the wall, having survived, although badly burned and furious. The Doctor and Elena wisely fled, though Elena was able to land a kick onto the monster's chest first when it got too near. The Doctor and Elena both called out for Yerox as they fled desperately and aimlessly across the maze.
Doctor! Elena! You're both alive! I'm over here, 2 corridors down!
Yerox shouted. Elena and the Doctor tried to run down the nearest corridor in Yerox's direction, but it was blocked by 2 skeletons holding 2 shields with Scratchman's human form on them, smiling. Elena tried to kick the shield, but she suffered an electric shock, while the skeletons were unaffected. As the Doctor helped Elena up, she saw the skeletons as well as Scratchman's face on both shields laughing hysterically. With the griffin not far away, the Doctor and Elena realized that they didn't have time to try and fight through the skeletons, and so the Doctor helped Elena over the wall to the left of them, but on the other side was red, scorching water rather than a floor. Elena jumped from the top of the wall to the other side after helping the Doctor up. Unfortunately, when the Doctor prepared to jump over, a large snake-like creature emerged from the water, hissing and snapping at the Doctor. Elena kicked the monster from behind, distracting it and allowing the Doctor to jump over, though he landed on his stomach on the other side of the wall, while his feet dangled barely over the red water. Another snake-like creature's head then emerged, but Elena pulled herself and the Doctor over to the other side, causing them both to fall onto the hard silver floor before the snakes could do anything. As soon as they got up, however, the travelers saw 2 fireballs from either direction coming their way.
Oh, give us a break, Elena cried in frustration more than anything else.
I think you've forgotten where you're supposed to be, Scratchman's voice bellowed before laughing. Again, the Doctor helped Elena up, but before she could return the favor, the griffin returned and snatched the Doctor a second time. A tug-of-war ensued, with Elena only barely holding on to the doctor. Fortunately, the two fireballs below collided, causing a massive explosion which then knocked the doctor, Elena, and the griffin backwards. The doctor and Elena, who had fallen to the other side, picked themselves up and ran down the nearest corridor, but at the end of it was another hole, which led to a very different type of hell dimension. This dimension was nothing more than a hideous swamp of black tar, though at the center of the tar was a giant throne, atop of which a massive demon with horns and a pig-like face sat. To think, Ehrlich, you say I never let you have any fun. Here's a Time Lord and a beautiful girl. I know how much you love eyes, to put it mildly. Just think what you can do to that big, beautiful eye. Scratchman laughed. A fireball blocked off the way back, but the griffin flew towards the doctor and Elena. The doctor jumped up and held onto the talons of the griffin. Elena soon joined in, and together the two of them were able to pull the monster down for a few seconds before it flew away, with both still holding onto either claw. While the griffin struggled to kick them away in the air, the doctor got a good look around and saw Yerox running down a nearby corridor from another flaming ball. He and Elena then jumped away from the griffin and landed in front of Yerox.
Doctor! Elena!
He said with joy.
We'll talk later,
the doctor said as he and Elena ran down the long corridor. But on the right-hand wall, the three fleeing time travelers were distracted by what looked like a door, rather than a hole in the ground, leading to another one of Scratchman's pocket dimensions. The three saw a woman standing in the doorway, though to each of the time travelers she appeared very differently. The doctor saw her as a hideous demonic hag, while Yerox saw her as the most stunningly beautiful woman he had ever seen, with flaming red hair and piercing green eyes. Elena, meanwhile, saw a relatively ordinary woman. The doctor was the first to break out of the trance and pulled his two companions out of it as well. The Time Lord had no idea what this strange woman would have done to them had they been pulled towards her, but it probably wouldn't have been very nice. They soon reached the end of the corridor, which was another portal on the ground. This time, it led to a version of hell that appeared to be nothing but a frozen wasteland. As the doctor prepared to help his two companions up the nearest wall again, the walls around them suddenly grew over 60 feet tall and completely smooth.
Not very sportsmanlike, Harry,
the doctor said.
Again, I think you've forgotten who you were talking to.
Be glad I gave you a chance for as long as I did. The doctor and his two companions tried to push at the walls as hard as they could, but it was no use. As the fireball hurled towards them, they had no choice but to jump through the portal into Scratchman's frozen wasteland below. Scratchman burst out laughing. Poor doctor. If this had been any other time, I would have given him more of a chance, but, well, time is short. He brought this on himself. Scratchman turned around, causing the water flooding into his castle to retreat, and the walls to turn to fire again, rejuvenated from the doctor and his companion's fear. Let's just hope his little machine is smart enough to realize I don't appreciate or respect stubbornness. In the wasteland below, the doctor struggled to move. The cold was so biting. His people, the Time Lords, could withstand the cold to a much greater extent than human beings, but even he was beginning to pass out. Around him, Elena and Yerox were both completely unconscious.
Elena, Yerox,
the doctor said weakly.
Please, we have to move. Find shelter, or we...
He whimpered before collapsing face first into the snow. To be continued.